Welcome to Hyfntv-News World News, where we take you around the world to catch you up on what's been going on around us. So let's see what's been going on in the Haps with the Maps. Today we start off in Africa, and why? Because it's the first continent in alphabetical order. Over in South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa is being accused of not reporting large sums of foreign currency being stolen from his private game home. Now, this would be committing misconduct and violate their constitution. This goes against their anti-corruption laws, as he is being accused of money laundering and violating the foreign currency laws. Ramaphosa is being questioned as to the source of where the currency came from, and he is holding steadfast, stating it was the result of selling animals from his farm. Their parliamentary panel is reviewing the situation and will determine if he is to be charged and/or impeached. So far, Ramaphosa contends that he is innocent and denies any wrongdoing and has not been charged with any crimes. Now moving over to Sudan, the military coup took place about a year ago and saw the toppling of their leader, Omar al-Bashir. And this marked new gains with the Sudanese political parties and the military signing a deal that would pave the way for civilian-led and organized elections. Now, while this is being applauded by many countries, there are those, of course, who are resistant, as they feel the military is still an extension of the government. When the coup took place, international financial assistance and debt relief was suspended, and that had a profound effect on their already tumbling economy. So now, this new framework will allow for a credible civilian government to oversee this financial assistance restored. According to the FFC, or the Forces for Freedom and Change Coalition, the goal of this agreement is to establish a fully civilian authority. Their belief is this will create a free climate for politics and hopefully provide a final agreements with the widest political participation. Now over in the Americas, we're going to focus on South America and Argentina. Their Vice President, Cristina Kirchner, is facing her corruption trial. That's right, and here's the issue. The accusation is that the Vice President was receiving contracts for public works during her time in government, which was from 2007 to 2015. Kirchner is still popular and draws massive crowds of supporters that believe her constitutional rights were violated during this investigation. Even if a verdict comes down, Kirchner will most likely file an appeal, and this case will be tied up in courts for some time. Now in Colombia, President Gustavo Petro stated this week he is renaming youth incarcerated for protesting and instead calling them peace managers. And this would allow them to be freed from custody, and they must meet certain conditions once freed. According to the Justice Minister, Nestor Osuna, they'll continue to be linked to the criminal proceedings that are being investigated or prosecuted. It's not a pardon, it's not an amnesty. And this move has caused concern for some, stating the protesters were acting in violence and not peace. Currently, around 230 cases are being investigated. Now, moving around the world in the Asia-Pacific region, Indonesia has just approved a new criminal code, at least their parliament has, which now bans sex outside of marriage with a punishable offense of up to 1 year in jail. And this will not just apply to Indonesians, it will be for foreigners as well. A few other updates include prohibiting cohabitation between unmarried couples, and then they throw in a few other rules while they're at it. It also includes banning insulting the president or state institutions, or staging a protest without notification. Now, these very intrusive laws were passed with support from all of the political parties, so we'll see how that story develops over there. Now, in Myanmar, a military coup seized power last year. Since then, more than 130 people have been put on death row, and another 7 who are students, all under the age of 25, are now also being sentenced to death. And this stems from a shooting back in April that killed a former military officer. And Myanmar has also been tough on democracy activists, and just this year it saw its first execution in decades. The thought by the military government is that using these death sentences will remove or at least suppress opposition. And moving over to China, last week we talked about the COVID restrictions in China and how it is crippling their economy. Well, now it looks like China is easing up on their policies. In Beijing, people were allowed into parks, stores, offices, and even airports without a negative COVID-19 test. This is a huge move as they were just blocking people in their homes last week. There may be another tranche of easing measures set to take place next month in the new year. Currently, China has reported just over 5,000 deaths from COVID, and that number is expected to rise. This new move was in an effort to bring some unity back to citizens due to those protests growing in numbers. Hopefully this works out, time will tell, and we will keep you updated on this as well. So now let's head over to Europe, and we're going to start off with the European Union. They have agreed to prevent or disallow any importing of goods that are linked to deforestation. Now, how they will regulate that is requiring companies to produce a due diligence statement showing their supply chains are not contributing to the destruction of forests before they sell the goods to the EU, or they will face a hefty fine. The prompting of this agreement was based on the belief that deforestation continues to contribute to quite a bit of greenhouse gas emissions, and that in turn affects the climate. The new regulation for companies will be able to show when and where the imports were produced and verify that they were not grown on land deforested after 2020. So that's major development there. Now, the inflation in Europe, it is still high. However, in Britain, the inflation is actually falling at least a little bit for the groceries. It's the first time in 2 years that there had been a decline in their grocery inflation, and this is great news, like we said, as the world continues to see an increase. To give an example, what used to cost $10 now costs $83, and that is with this new decrease. So let's hope these trends keep happening and the world can restabilize. And of course, we have the brief update about the war going on. It still rages on in Ukraine. The Russians still heavily engaged in what they call their special mission. There were 60 prisoners of war exchanged between the two countries, and actually throughout this war there have been quite a few prisoner exchanges in the hundreds of people. Ukraine maintains a lot of support globally as Hungary has just voted to supply the EU aid package for Ukraine. Despite global pressure to end this, the Kremlin has announced that there are no prospects for peace talks at this moment, as Russia is continuing to claim Ukraine is actually the one shelling Zaporizhia, which is that nuclear power plant that has become famous in the news. Battle tactics have shifted as this war rages on, as there have been reports of drone attacks in Russian airfields by Ukraine. In Latvia, they have canceled the license of a Russian independent television station called TV Rain. And in Russia, they have continued its bombing of Ukraine, sending over more than 100. We pray for peace and safety to all of those affected in this ugly war, and we thank God daily for our freedom and security here at home. And speaking of, let's go all the way back home here now to the United States. First up, we have a former U.S. lawmaker, David Rivera, who has been arrested for acting as an agent of the Venezuelan government and conspiring to launder money. In emails between Rivera and another individual, they were using code names for the Venezuelan president and code words for the amount of money. What they were trying to do was prevent further U.S. economic sanctions. And then next story up, during this year's election coverage, we have been talking about how the results of this year's election would result in which party would control the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House, and how that can affect how the government will function. With the results of last month's election and the Republicans gaining control of the House, there's a rush to pass laws while in the next few weeks prior to the Republicans gaining control officially. One such bill is that of same-sex marriage. We will keep you updated as this legislation attempts to speed through the process and get on the president's desk before the January 3rd deadline. And last, here in the United States, but dealing with China in an interesting story, we don't have too many facts just yet, but apparently hackers from China have stolen millions of dollars worth of U.S. COVID relief money. Now, this was confirmed by the Secret Service. However, like we said, no additional details have been provided just yet, but we will be tracking down more facts and bringing them to you as they come. Thank you for joining us on today's trip around the world. It is important to know what's happening around the world around you. I'm Tiff with today's Around the World News right here on the Hyfntv network. See you next time.